Hello from St. Louis, where we do get a taste of IMC conditions every so often, but just enough to where it's easy to get rusty. Remember, there is no immunity from spatial disorientation. We aviators are all at risk, so let's examine some of the elements of spatial orientation so that we can avoid spatial disorientation. Let's expand the definition of situational awareness to say that it is the mental state which results from the gathering and processing of all available sensory and mental information to provide for a continuous stream of decisions about the safe and effective operation of the aircraft. Whew. Spatial disorientation is a frequent cause of the high aircraft mishap rate, which we are all trying to correct by our awareness of the problem. Let's look at a breakdown of the causes of spatial disorientation. Illusions are sensory perceptions of both the visual and vestibular inner ear type, and there are also mental causes, both distractions and task overload. Our perception of the world is based on our terrestrial origins. Man's evolution results from being earthbound and is not the result of flight. We can adapt, but we must always be suspicious of what we visually perceive, what we sense from our inner ear and feel by the seat of our pants. In 1929, Jimmy Doolittle became the first pilot to take off, fly, and land an airplane using instruments alone without a view outside of the cockpit. From steam to glass. Thank you, Jimmy. In order to recognize spatial disorientation, one needs a good understanding of spatial orientation. The physiologic basis for spatial orientation is derived from three elements: our visual system, our vestibular system, and our proprioceptive system, which are the muscles and tendons which provide us with a seat-of-the-pants feedback. Our visual system is the most important of the three, but as we will see from the visual illusion slide, they can be tricked. Our visual system has two functional components. They are focal vision and ambient vision, and both are critical in the flying environment. We all understand these components when they are pointed out to us, but let's take a closer look at each. Focal vision allows one to identify an object in space and to orient it with respect to oneself. The object is recognized in fine detail by using our central or macular vision, but it can be expanded to functionally include the central 30 degrees of the visual field. It is the visual field used for instrument flying. And when you add binocular vision, which provides depth perception, you have a visual skill which is critical for operations such as air refueling and formation flying. When the size and shape of objects meets our expectations, we are comforted that we are seeing reality. We also use motion parallax and interposition to augment our focal visual clues. Here's a list of additional visual clues that we rely on for our spatial orientation. Flying in VMC is the preferred way to aviate, but we do not always have the opportunity to fly in optimal conditions. So, when we lose visual clues, we run the risk of experiencing visual illusions. Ambient vision is the functional flip side of focal vision. Ambient vision is the big screen view of life. Obviously, they both work together, and as we see from the example of riding a bike and reading, they can work independently. Our visual system, as we can see from the next slide, is our principal means of stabilizing our body in the environment. When you walk to the edge of that 1,000-foot cliff and look down, it is not only fear of heights that makes you anxious. There is a visual vestibular conflict that causes a degradation of posture stabilization. As the visual image for posture stabilization becomes less reliable at greater heights, the vestibular system takes over but never does as good a job, and that little sway you get makes you feel real queasy and uneasy. Walk down a darkened hall at night and close your eyes and see if you are as steady as when you can see. The vestibular apparatus was developed for forces and speeds that we experience on Mother Earth and not for flying. It is a wonderfully complex organ which senses sound and motion. It responds to gravity and initially to acceleration, but soon becomes unreliable as acceleration is replaced by velocity. It contains both linear and angular acceleration sensors. Let's have a look at the vestibular organ. Note the orientation of the semicircular canals. Roll, pitch, and yaw, right? When the visual system is not actively sensing the environment, the vestibular system gives us good initial information about acceleration, but can quickly become unreliable as acceleration becomes velocity. The otoliths, rocks in our heads, are located in the saccule, which is the vestibular organ which senses gravity and such things as head position. It also senses linear acceleration. But again, in the absence of visual clues, rapid acceleration and gravity in summation on takeoff can cause a very bad pitch-up vestibular illusion, which many times occurs close to the ground, leading to a fatal outcome when the pilot inputs a pitch-down control response. I believe that this was a contributing factor which happened to a young doctor that I knew. He departed Spirit of St. Louis Airport on a dark, foggy night and struck trees 1/2 mile off the end of the runway under full engine power. Here is a graphic demonstrating that illusion. Somatogyral illusions are rotating or spinning illusions. Again, in the absence of good visual clues, both focal and ambient, we are stuck with the unreliability of the vestibular system once acceleration is replaced by constant velocity. Let's have another look at the semicircular canals and how they relate to flight forces. I think you get the picture. Here, the sequence of control inputs that result in a fatal, uncontrolled flight into terrain when visual clues are absent and instrument flying procedures are not followed. JFK could have hit the autopilot engage button or stomped on the blue to input rudder correction, but instead he relied on bad judgment and poor training. I don't think that this is going to come out very well. Anyone, and probably everyone who has been to pilot training, has been in the spinning barony chair which gets the fluid in your semicircular canals sloshing around and then causes that violent eye twitching and sick, disoriented feeling when head position is changed. Keep the head still. Use your eyes to look around the cockpit in IMC conditions or use very cautious head movements. Is this what happened to the F-18 departing radar trail at Lakenheath with an INOP INS? Yuck. I don't know the vestibular mechanism for getting into this situation, but I know I don't want to be there and am going to go out and practice my instrument flying some more. In the absence of those reliable visual clues, these are some of the situations that can get you into trouble. Here are some illusions that show how the eyes can be tricked. Here is a visual illusion where your eye motion induces the sensation that circles are rotating. Of course they're not. And when your stare is fixed, the rotation ceases. These are towers viewed from a single viewpoint, and the right tower appears to be leaning. But when they are superimposed, it is apparent that the towers are correctly aligned because they now share a common vanishing point, which you see in the next slide. For a very comprehensive and complete tour of visual illusions, both static and dynamic, I suggest that you take a tour of them on YouTube or Google visual illusions, and that will convince you that what you visually perceive is not always reality. Yow! Hopefully this tour has convinced us that our visual vestibular system and seat-of-the-pants sensations may be unreliable in IMC flying conditions. The other part of the disorientation problem is distraction and other elements such as task overload. Distractions and task overload can not just be momentary, but have to exceed certain threshold to get one in trouble, but they are part of the cross-check. All the flight crew were working on the gear problem when Eastern Airlines 401 descended CFIT into the Everglades. I hope that this presentation has helped all of us in recognizing the problem of spatial disorientation and making whatever mid-course corrections are necessary to avoid adding to the mishap numbers. There is no substitute for experience, proficiency, and currency. And don't forget, stay healthy, fit, and rested, and cross-check, cross-check, cross-check.